Welcome to your in-depth weekly astrology overview and zodiac forecast for week commencing the 26th of January. I'm going to share some of the big news of the week to begin with, then on screen the event chart on Monday. That always provides an influential backdrop for the whole 7 days. I'll then go through each of the influences in detail to give a clear picture of what we can collectively expect. Please stay with me. I'll then go through each of the 12 zodiac signs from Aries through to Pisces, which you can relate to in terms of your ascendant, sun or the moon. And at the front of each of those zodiacal segments, I will share an event chart to better illustrate exactly where the planets are. I'm astrologer Patrick Arundel. Thank you so much for joining me. It's great to have your company. All your views, interactions, likes and comments are truly appreciated. If you're new here or yet to subscribe to the channel, please do so now and help it to thrive. So as we go into this week, Neptune returns to the first zodiac sign of Aries, which is hugely symbolic. Neptune is a very mysterious influence. It can be very much to do with our imagination, it can be to do with projection, and it can be to do with healing, particularly through its journey in the sign of Pisces, for which it is the modern aquatic ruler. But the sign of Aries is of course a fire sign, and Neptune is watery. What does that mean? But also on Monday we have a quarter moon. Each month, twice, the moon and the sun are at 90 degrees. It's brief, but it does provide a backdrop for the following week. It tends to get overlooked to focus more on full and new moons. But this is a quarter moon where the moon is actually blessed. It's in the sign of Taurus. Loves to be there, it's exalted, but the moon's not just clashing with the sun, it clashes in order with Mars, Pluto, the sun, Mercury and Venus, all within the day. So I feel Monday is going to be pretty tense, despite a lot of the attention going on the arrival of Neptune. But also on Tuesday, Mars and Pluto combine together in a conjunction in the sign of Aquarius, which can give us a desire to achieve some very good things, because Aquarius is a very idealistic sign. It's about the collective, and Pluto is the planet which is about us collectively. We are all part of a network. We may see ourselves as being all very different, but we do have some commonalities. We can celebrate those this week, but also I think we're going to find out those people who see things very differently to us. And because the sign of Aquarius is very much about the future, who's going to try to use the power of Mars and Pluto in a less positive way in order to get what they want from their future? But we do have, from a social perspective, a glittering combination between Mercury and Venus, which peaks on Thursday. So I'll tell you more about that. And then at the end of the week, we have a full moon. It's a full moon in the lovely warm sign of Leo. The moon there can be very affectionate and very generous, but what's the implication for the following 2 weeks? On the screen now is the event chart right at the top of the week, and there's the moon exalted in Taurus at 3 degrees, but look at the role of Mars and Pluto. Mars and Pluto together, less so I feel in Aquarius, but certainly in some of the zodiac signs, can be a very mighty and impactful combination. Mars, of course, can be about desire, it can be about action, but it can be about war, and it can be about force. And Pluto can be very much about power. And the moon is much more to do with our emotions, anything to do with property and our need for security. Because the sign of Aquarius is how we're all collectively networked, I feel that something could happen, maybe around financial markets, maybe to do with the property sector, but maybe it's to do with ideologies. People may want to get something, because the sign of Taurus can be about money, it can be about values, but it can be about agriculture, but it can also be about land. And we have seen for all but the 4 months of last year when Uranus was in Gemini, that ever since Uranus moved into Taurus for 5 months in 2018 and full time until last year from March 2019, we have seen people taking land in a very sudden, unexpected and impulsive way that wasn't theirs. That's intriguing, isn't it? And Pluto and Mars are squaring to the moon in the same zodiac sign. But what we do have as the day goes on, the moon squares with Mercury but also with Venus. I think that's going to be less sharp, but as we come into this new week, the confusion that Neptune can create and the action that Mars wants and the desire for instant outcomes is going to be really, really intriguing. But on Tuesday, as I mentioned, Mars and Pluto come into a conjunction. Now, in a very constructive way, if you've got a clear idea of what you want to achieve around the future plan, and there is going to be collaboration and cooperation, some kind of leadership could come through in a very, very positive way. But if there is someone that you encounter in a group dynamic who wants it all on their own terms, just be aware that it could be because of Mars and Pluto. However, the diplomacy that can come from Mercury and Venus's conjunction is also in the mix, and that peaks on Thursday, but also that can be brilliant for any kind of social meetup. So as this year is unfolding, if you're wanting to join a new group, anything to do with a hobby, maybe where you can really enrich your individual talents and yet in some way or another collaborate with others, so you all get the best from the situation. One of the concepts I think of Aquarianism, which I think works really well, is where people share things. And it can work particularly well in the agricultural sector. And we do see in Europe particularly a lot of cooperatives, but each of the members of the cooperative is actually an individual business. And what the cooperative does is actually just very skilled at selling those plums or tomatoes or those grapes to a chain up the distribution network, and the grower can concentrate on what they're very good at. So that's where collaboration can work extremely well, and that's very Aquarius in its approach. Now, as the week goes on, we do head towards that full moon in the sign of Leo. As I mentioned, the moon in Leo can be very generous, playful, and very charismatic, but it can also be a bit prideful. The sign of Aquarius is much more aware of maybe a bit of detachment from what we want as an individual, and understanding that we sometimes need to do things to help each other, whereas the moon in Leo is much more about I. So there could be a tension point there, particularly over the following 2 weeks. So as much as we've got those brilliant energies in Aquarius as we come into this week, and it is possible that we will see new ways of people forging better alliances because of the power particularly of Mars and Pluto and the square to the moon. I think the potential for some instability at the start of this week is unfortunately very strong. But how can we make Aquarius energy work for us? Well, just in small ways. You know, we read a lot about how everything's not very good. You know, it's broken. Broken Britain seems to be a metaphor that's passed around a lot. And yet there's lots of good people doing lots of good things, volunteering, looking out for people in their community, being conscious of those people who are less fortunate, keeping in touch with our friends. You know, we also read that it's not always good to go and have a drink, but actually the benefits of being with other people and sharing our stories can be absolutely fantastic, because I think one of the big things that's worrying about modern society and technology is isolation. So if we can do anything with this Aquarius energy to knit together, celebrate what makes us individual. If people are a bit quirky or have brilliant zany ideas, let's cheer them on. But also technology, which is becoming such a main part of our existence is, I think the sign of Aquarius can be a bit detached, and with Pluto there with Mars, we may see things speeding up in a way that seems a little bit alarming, but what we're doing is we're adapting, and there will be some part of those technologies and sciences which do have some really very positive upsides. Please stay with me as I go through each of the 12 signs. If you've yet to order your personal 12-month forecast, totally unique to you based on your birth data, and just to say, if you don't know your time, you can choose my solar option, which I've specifically developed for people who don't know their time. Astrologers sometimes produce what's known as a noon chart, and that assumes the moon is halfway through the day, but also that's where the ascendant will be. I don't use an ascendant because I think it's misleading. Now, if I do a rectification for a client, we will nail the ascendant down. But that solar chart's very good if you don't know your time. But also, you'll get your life roadmap report, which helps us to understand the patterns that are played out in our lives. And you'll get your free gift of your general love Chinese and Indian written zodiac forecast. But through to the end of January, I'm giving 50% off instead of 30, which is my usual offer. Just apply Astro26 at the checkout to achieve that discount. Thank you. So Aries, your week commencing the 26th of January. On the screen now is your event chart, and you will see that Neptune, due to move back to your sign on Monday, is still in Pisces, and it's because it's later in the day. But what you do have at the very start of the day and the week is Mars very close to Pluto. Mars, of course, is your ruler, and it gives you a desire for action. But the 11th house is very much about where you can maintain your individuality, but in some ways or another collaborate or cooperate with others. Now, it may be around your social situation, or it could be around a project that you're really excited about. And the combination of Mars particularly and Pluto on Tuesday can give you an enormous amount of authority and thrust, which is truly exciting. But just be aware as we go into this week that if finance is involved in any plan you've got, you can't rush to get to where you want to be. It may be there's some negotiation that's required, and someone may see things differently to you. And also the collective in the sign of Aquarius that you can see is actually very idealistic, but the world we live in generally is not. So it's important to be realistic in our approach. Now, once Neptune moves back into your sign, of course it had 6 months with you last year, it is an opportunity if you have got a desire to be more creative or self-expressive, whether it is with photography, with film, whether it's to do with the arts, whether it's to do with writing or music, you could be absolutely inspired in the years to come. There's no doubt about that at all. But just be aware that the sign of Aries is the first zodiac sign, and therefore it is about new beginnings, but also it's about identity. And one of the things with Neptune in the first house is it can make things a little bit opaque and hazy. Now, if you're someone with a very clear understanding of who you are, you're going to be affected much less by Neptune in that regard. What it can do is make you more conscious of things like healing, compassion, looking out for people who are less fortunate. But if you're someone who's well established, what Neptune can do is also very subtly erode what we already have. Now, I don't mean that in a fearful way. It's just in life and astrology, things are always moving, so we have to adapt the whole time. So I just would say, with Neptune moving into your sign, if there is something that you're very keen and very inspired by that you want to share with others, the link particularly with Neptune, Mars and Pluto at the start of this week does give you an awesome set of influences which can help you to mesmerize people with your passion but also your vision in a very exciting way. But if there is money involved, just be sure that you've done your sums and be aware that you may encounter someone who has a different world view. Now, as the week goes on, if you do get the chance to get together with some friends, perhaps people you haven't seen for some while, or a new group of people, it may turn out to be really great fun, particularly with Venus and Mercury in a brilliant alliance on Thursday. But just know that Mercury can be the planet of business and Venus can be the planet of money, and I think you can gain by appealing to a wide cross-section of people. The other thing to bear in mind, Aries, is that you can be very much a leader, and if you're working with a group of people, you could play a big role within the mix, and that in itself can also provide a lot of thrust this week. But by the end of the week, if your focus is more on your social situation, if, for example, you have a relationship with someone, but you're not feeling that you're seeing your friends as much as you would like, or pursuing your own interest, it may be something that you have to toggle and discuss with a partner in the following 2 weeks. But the moon for you in the sign of Leo, the 5th house, is definitely about your need to express yourself. So if the future that you're in at the moment, your direction of travel, isn't really giving you the opportunity to showcase your brilliance, that's a full moon that asks you to think how you can attune, how you can flex in some kind of way. And because all the energies this week are in fixed signs, which can be resistant to change in terms of the quarter moon, the clash with those planets in Aquarius, and then the full moon at the end of the week, that part of you that has that determination and grit to overcome obstacles and frustrations, that really can be a great asset to you, as this week could provide those opportunities, but also you could encounter people who don't really want to change. But that's where your passion and persuasion can be so much of an asset to you. If you've yet to order your personal 12-month forecast, totally unique to you based on your birth data, and just to say, if you don't know your time, you can choose my solar option, which I've specifically developed for people who don't know their time. But also you'll get your life roadmap report, which helps us to understand the patterns that are played out in our lives. And you'll get your free gift of your general love Chinese and Indian written zodiac forecast. But through to the end of January, I'm giving 50% off. Just apply Astro26 at the checkout to achieve that discount. Thank you. So Taurus, your week commencing the 26th of January. On the screen is your event chart. A quarter moon in Taurus on Monday squares off not just with the sun in Aquarius, but also the powerful, potent combination of Mars and Pluto. And they could, particularly as they come into an exact alliance on Tuesday, really encourage you to go for a golden prize in a very assertive way. And it may be that you're right to do that, but just be aware that the planet of mystery, Neptune, has returned to a very psychological part of your sign. So just be conscious of what your motives may be. The quarter moon may be that suddenly something you've aspired to might not quite chime to how you feel at this exact moment more personally. But you know, your ruler Venus is in a sparkling alliance with Mercury, the communicator, all through this week, which peaks on Thursday. And if there is something that you want to make progress with, your diplomacy, your personality power, and some subtle persuasion will probably work better than the brute force of Mars and Pluto. And as we come to the end of this week, because there is a full moon in a very quiet and reflective part of your scope in the sign of Leo, it's just reminding you that whatever it is you want to achieve in the material world, very much to do with the 10th house and where those Aquarian players are, needs to feel right. So whether it is around your work, whether it is around another kind of goal or ambition you've got, maybe it's around a property matter, that work-life balance scenario that can prove so elusive for us all could come sharply into focus at the end of this week when you feel more tender and perhaps a little more vulnerable, despite all that thrusting energy at the top of your chart as we go into this week. If you've yet to order your personal 12-month forecast, totally unique to you based on your birth data, and just to say, if you don't know your time, you can choose my solar option, which I've specifically developed for people who don't know their time, but also you'll get your life roadmap report, which helps us to understand the patterns that are played out in our lives. And you'll get your free gift of your general love Chinese and Indian written zodiac forecast. But through to the end of January, I'm giving 50% off. Just apply Astro26 at the checkout to achieve that discount. Thank you. Gemini, your week commencing the 26th of January. On the screen, your event chart. On the face of it, the combination of your ruler Mercury and Venus in a sparkling alliance which peaks on Thursday is very positive indeed. But there are some delicate undertones. Although the cluster of energy in Aquarius is very much about expansion, independence and excitement, on Monday, the moon is in a very psychological area, and the planet which is very much to do with that, Neptune, moves into your sector of friendships and alliances and long-term plans. Someone with that quarter moon between the moon in Taurus, but it's clashed not just with the sun, but the turbulent combination of Mars and Pluto. Someone could make an observation about you which you find actually really surprising, maybe quite challenging. And if there is something exchanged around a point of view or a philosophy which doesn't mesh with yours, it may take on a life force of its own. And the reason is that Mars and Pluto in a conjunction exactly on Tuesday is very potent indeed. And in the 9th house, if you are wanting to go somewhere, if you are actually moving around, it could make you a bit impatient. It's important not to get too caught up with that. But if you are having a debate or a discussion, just be aware that someone else may feel just as passionately as you. As you come to the end of the week, although there is still that beautiful link between Mercury and Venus, which can give you lots of ability to discuss things in a really, really sweet way. The full moon, which occurs on Sunday, can just make you much more conscious of how your words are perceived or how you express things. So as the week draws to a close and we have the backdrop energy beginning for the following fortnight, I think the exchange of ideas is going to intensify. You may find that the speed of life picks up as well. So on the face of it, this week begins with a sense that you can be very persuasive and charming, but I think there is some deeper, more psychological energies which could just come into play and perhaps surprise you, or are you going to surprise someone with your observations that you've been keeping close to your chest. If you've yet to order your personal 12-month forecast, totally unique to you based on your birth data, and just to say, if you don't know your time, you can choose my solar option, which I've specifically developed for people who don't know their time, but also you'll get your life roadmap report, which helps us to understand the patterns that are played out in our lives. And you'll get your free gift of your general love Chinese and Indian written zodiac forecast. But through to the end of January, I'm giving 50% off. Just apply Astro26 at the checkout to achieve that discount. Thank you. So Cancer, your week commencing the 26th of January. On the screen is your event chart. As ever, we need to be mindful of the position of the moon, your ruler. And it's in the friendly 11th house for you, and in Taurus where it is exalted. So it loves being there, but it is challenged strongly early on Monday by the rugged energies of Mars and the potent power broker of Pluto, as well as the Sun, and they're in the 8th house. That can be very psychological. It can be to do with things like possessiveness, control and leverage. For example, if you've got a friendship in your world and you feel that there are some strings attached to that, that could be something you become more conscious of, even a romantic involvement. But if you were wanting to discuss a contractual or long-term financial plan, the planet of money, Venus, is blessed by the quick wits of Mercury all through this week, but particularly on Thursday. Just know, however, with Neptune returning back into Aries later on Monday, if you are a little bit uncertain about what you do for a living at the moment, that confusion could increase, particularly with the arrival of Saturn back into Aries on the 14th of February, because essentially Saturn is about industry, but Neptune's about what we want in terms of the more ethereal world. And if your sole purpose isn't being fulfilled at the moment, despite the fact you may have some real financial benefits in an existing role, that collective in Aquarius could arouse within you that more idealistic side of your nature. By the end of the week, we have a full moon. Full moon's very important to you, with it being your ruler, and we see a face-off between the moon in the proud Leo and the sun, which is detrimented in Aquarius. If you are trying to balance the books, that's something you can really work on in the following 2 weeks. But if your values don't align with someone you're needing to work closely with, that can also be something that shows up. But equally, if there's something you're a bit attached to that you're finding difficult to release, just be conscious that that could be holding you back from really going for what's truly right for you at that deeper, more meaningful level that's often important for Cancers. If you've yet to order your personal 12-month forecast, totally unique to you based on your birth data, and just to say, if you don't know your time, you can choose my solar option, which I've specifically developed for people who don't know their time, but also you'll get your life roadmap report, which helps us to understand the patterns that are played out in our lives, and you'll get your free gift of your general love Chinese and Indian written zodiac forecast. But through to the end of January, I'm giving 50% off. Just apply Astro26 at the checkout to achieve that discount. Thank you. So Leo, your week commencing the 26th of January. On the screen now, your adventure and your ruler, the king of the heavens, the sun, in the sign of Aquarius. Very much about relationships, but you also have the more thrusting, assertive energies of Mars and Pluto, and the more sparkling, lighter and brighter vibe of Mercury and Venus. And Mercury and Venus are actually coming into an exact conjunction on Thursday. So if you do encounter someone this week you really like, that's a fantastic portent to really be drawn together in a very bright and positive way. However, right at the start of the week, the moon is high in the sky, in the very visible for you 10th house, along with the potentially disruptive Uranus, which has been, perhaps at times over the last 7 years, posing some questions about what you do for a living. But the 10th house can also be where we meet people in positions of authority, or people who in some ways might want to choose to dominate rather than collaborate and cooperate. And the sign of Aquarius is very much about cooperation. So by the end of this week, when we have the full moon in your zodiac sign, if you are feeling that however much you're leaning into the needs of someone else, however much you're being very constructive around all sorts of connections with others, if you don't feel heard, I feel that energy between Mars and Pluto, which peaks on Tuesday, is the one that may be the you choose to use. In other words, being much firmer on your boundaries and letting people know, even if diplomatically with Venus's help, that it's not good enough if they're not leaning into what you need. So if there is a relationship in your world, and it doesn't have to be a personal one, maybe with a line manager, a boss, a friend that isn't very collaborative or two-way, by the end of this week and that full moon, that could see you speaking out and really letting people know what your minimum standard is. And if that's the case, Leo, good for you. But if you are encountering people who are up for entering into a spirit of connection, cooperation, then a lot of positive things can develop with those individuals. If you've yet to order your personal 12-month forecast, totally unique to you based on your birth data, and just to say, if you don't know your time, you can choose my solar option, which I've specifically developed for people who don't know their time, but also you'll get your life roadmap report, which helps us to understand the patterns that are played out in our lives. And you'll get your free gift of your general love Chinese and Indian written zodiac forecast. But through to the end of January, I'm giving 50% off. Just apply Astro26 at the checkout to achieve that discount. Thank you. Virgo, your week commencing the 26th of January. On the screen, your event chart. Your lovely ruler Mercury in the 6th house of your chart still, and that's an echo of the energy of your zodiac sign, where Mercury really appreciates precision that creates some kind of practical outcome. But in the sign of Aquarius, the host, it's also about precision linked to progression. So how can you use the forward-looking energy of Aquarius in a way which does improve the efficiencies and smooth running of your everyday world? But your enemy this week could be impatient, which might be actually something you don't usually display. But it's because a quarter moon on Monday is amplifying a restlessness and the clash not just with the Sun, but also the mighty duo of Mars and Pluto could see you uncharacteristically rush something, or choose to take on more demands and obligations, which then you could end up resenting because of that quarter moon. So do be mindful of your need for space and personal freedom. Now on Tuesday, Mars and Pluto reach an absolute conjunction. And if you have been feeling, since Aquarius season began, in the mood to reform, to find ways to improve your diet or your exercise, the drive to push forwards with that can be considerable. But by Thursday, Mercury, your ruler, comes into a beautiful conjunction with Venus. And if you are discussing anything, particularly at work, your quick wits, but also a degree of diplomacy, can work just as much as that thrust that Mars and Pluto can give you too. But by the end of this week, you might find yourself feeling just a little bit weary. And one of the reasons for this is that full moon is in the 12th house of your sign, very psychological, whereas the collective in Aquarius is very practical and very physical. So if you are feeling a bit below par, don't just look at those everyday demands. Do look at how you're thinking about things. Are you giving yourself enough time to just rest your mind as much as your body? But when it comes to your professional situation, if there is someone who tends to be a bit of a nitpicker, just be aware that they may not necessarily tell you if they got an issue with your performance, much more likely to speak to someone else. So one of the things that is important this week is to make sure that your usual desire to make sure that everything is just so is not in any way distracted by the impatience of Mars and Pluto's conjunction. If you've yet to order your personal 12-month forecast, totally unique to you based on your birth data, and just to say, if you don't know your time, you can choose my solar option, which I've specifically developed for people who don't know their time, but also you'll get your life roadmap report, which helps us to understand the patterns that are played out in our lives. And you'll get your free gift of your general love Chinese and Indian written zodiac forecast. But through to the end of January, I'm giving 50% off. Just apply Astro26 at the checkout to achieve that discount. Thank you. So Libra, your week commencing the 26th of January. On the screen is your event chart. Your beautiful ruler Venus continues her journey through the most glamorous part of your scope, but she's very close to the effervescent, bubbly energy of Mercury, and the two come into a conjunction on Thursday. If you did encounter someone new, socially or romantically, or you're showcasing your talents, you can dial up your charisma with passion motivation and confidence all through this week, not least because of the conjunction between Mars and Pluto, which are going to give you a much greater sense of daring do. But just be aware they are squared along with the Sun by the position of the Moon on Monday, and that quarter moon provides a backdrop throughout this whole week. Now, because the 8th house where the moon is can be about desire, possessiveness, and also long-term finances, and the 5th house where you have all that Aquarius energy can be about speculation and risk, if you are thinking about doing something that is daring around your resources, just be aware that not always do investments work out. But that square between the Moon, Pluto and Mars particularly could flag up a situation if you feel that someone's being rather possessive or controlling. Maybe some of the energy around that person, they may be very jealous of some of your social interaction, is actually quite draining from an emotional, energetic viewpoint. Yet as this week goes on, and we do have that very bright conjunction between Venus and Mercury, your personality power can help you to negotiate any potential challenges there may be, and a joke here can certainly diffuse some tensions, but by the end of the week you may find yourself with somewhat of a choice to make. It may be around your social situation, it could be around your love life, maybe more than one person intrigued by you. But if you do find yourself wanting to weigh up which direction to go, remember with Libra energy, if you're not sure, if things keep going up and down, keep oscillating, and you don't feel a complete sense of certainty, that will tell you to just pause and consider things until you're really sure. But it's possible also the planets are prompting you not to be so focused on what your friends think, particularly with the full moon, and have much more confidence in doing in the here and now what's really right for you. This is a divine set of influences, Libra. It's very, very unique. So do show the world just exactly how talented, but also how adorable you can be. If you've yet to order your personal 12-month forecast, totally unique to you based on your birth data, and just to say, if you don't know your time, you can choose my solar option, which I've specifically developed for people who don't know their time. But also, you'll get your life roadmap report, which helps us to understand the patterns that are played out in our lives. And you'll get your free gift of your general love Chinese and Indian written zodiac forecast. But through to the end of January, I'm giving 50% off. Just apply Astro26 at the checkout to achieve that discount. Thank you. So Scorpio, your week commencing the 26th of January. On the screen now is your event chart. Your two rulers of Mars and Pluto are triggered on Monday by the moon in the part of your situation to do with your connections to others. You've had Uranus in the main for the last 7 years, all but for those 4 months last year, in the sector of relating, and maybe it has been a time of change, perhaps sudden endings, sudden beginnings, restlessness all round. But that's taught you a lot. But the collective of energy in the sign of Aquarius is making you much more conscious of your boundaries as far as being protective and your emotional security. But if someone's not particularly tuned in to where you are early on Monday, you may actually find yourself getting uncharacteristically extremely frustrated. That could peak by Tuesday, but it's important to try not to buy into this too much. And what you do have as an asset this week is the combination between Venus and Mercury. Mercury in the 4th house can be a little bit withdrawn. It has a potential to be more subjective about the clarity that Mercury usually has, but being blessed by the charm and diplomacy of Venus, the peace planner, on Thursday they come into a conjunction. So even if a family member or a friend or someone you're dealing with in terms of a contractor or around a property isn't quite getting it at the speed you need, Venus and Mercury are asking you to keep a sense of equanimity, because diplomacy and just taking a step back and not reacting, not being triggered, because Mars in the fourth house can be a little bit defensive. By the end of the week, the full moon will help you to make your decision on some key strands. But because the moon is very high in the sky, whatever you're feeling, because you can be quite a private person, you can be very direct and to the point in your observations about other people, but when it comes to your inner world, that's something you can be quite guarded about. But you may find on the back of that full moon that your emotions come into the open much more quickly and openly if something isn't quite going as you want. So it's a week where you need to be aware of your sense of vulnerability, be conscious of the need to be protective, but also be conscious that you could be a little bit more triggered by the reactions of others if they don't quite come up to the mark. If you've yet to order your personal 12-month forecast, totally unique to you based on your birth data, and just to say, if you don't know your time, you can choose my solar option, which I've specifically developed for people who don't know their time, but also you'll get your life roadmap report, which helps us to understand the patterns that are played out in our lives, and you'll get your free gift of your general love Chinese and Indian written zodiac forecast. But through to the end of January, I'm giving 50% off. Just apply Astro26 at the checkout to achieve that discount. Thank you. Sagittarius, your week commencing the 26th of January. On the screen is your event chart. And just like last week, Jupiter does continue to rewind in that 8th house. So you're still going to be considering your long-term financial future, but also where you're most deeply invested emotionally, spiritually, and perhaps even intimately. However, the moon and the sun as we go into this week are not on the best of terms. They're squaring off. But what makes it more complex this quarter moon, which provides a backdrop for the whole week, is the muscular energy of Mars, which can be impatient in the 3rd house, and the transformational energies of Pluto are clashing with that quarter moon on Monday too. So if you set your intentions to try and get a lot done this week and at pace, and it doesn't quite go to plan early on Monday, you may find yourself with a headache, a migraine, or a real sense of frustration which could boil over. Just be aware. Give yourself an achievable list to go through the week. You are going to be very bubbly. There's a very epiphyseal link between Mercury and Venus, which reaches a peak on Thursday. So if you need to be persuasive or share some information, have the faith that people will be responsive, because I believe that they will. But dialogue, communication and travel are sharply in focus with the full moon, which occurs on Sunday in your fellow fire sign of Leo. Now, a 9th house energy is very much about the higher truth, but it can also point towards that part of you that likes to break free from limitations and be very frank about how you feel. And because the sun and those players in Aquarius about everyday conversations, even if you feel that some people want to discuss some quite trivial things that don't quite have the same appeal for you, just try to work through that, because if you're really focused on what you want to say to people, you can be very persuasive, very enthusiastic, and that can draw a lot of good things to you. But if you are heading off anywhere at the end of this week, I wouldn't try to rush the escape. If you're heading somewhere and you're driving, enjoy it. Don't try to go too fast, because that Mars and Pluto conjunction gives you a lot of thrust, but it also finds it very difficult to believe that there could be anything that will stop you getting to your destination at the speed of light. And we all know that traffic delays are part of everyday life these days, so that will just feed a sense of exasperation unless you anticipate just planning it and enjoying the route. If you've yet to order your personal 12-month forecast, totally unique to you based on your birth data, and just to say, if you don't know your time, you can choose my solar option, which I've specifically developed for people who don't know their time, but also you'll get your life roadmap report, which helps us to understand the patterns that are played out in our lives, and you'll get your free gift of your general love Chinese and Indian written zodiac forecast. But through to the end of January, I'm giving 50% off. Just apply Astro26 at the checkout to achieve that discount. Thank you. Capricorn, your week commencing the 26th of January. On the screen, your event chart. Your ruler Saturn preparing to move back into Aries on the 14th of February, but later on Monday, Neptune precedes Saturn. If you recall, Neptune moved first into Aries at the end of March last year. Now, Neptune in Aries through to 2038, where he's going to be for the long term, could impact on your desire for peace and quiet and tranquility around where you live. If you've always had a craving to live by the sea, don't be surprised if that becomes much more of a desire. But right at the start of this week, those two players are linking to Uranus, the planet of innovation, which has been shaking things up for you, perhaps romantically or around your ideas sector over the last 7 years. But you also have the moon in that fifth house. The moon in the fifth house, particularly exalted in Taurus, can be very generous, very warm-hearted, but there is a square between the moon and the impatient energies of Mars and the transformational vibe of Pluto, along with the sun on Monday. If you find yourself wanting to splash out on something in an uncharacteristically impulsive way, you might just want to hold off a little bit. It's not to say that your financial situation isn't looking bright this week still, because the planet of money is exactly aligning with Mercury, the planet of business, on Thursday. If you have a conversation then, I think it can be very productive. But good energy can build up earlier in the week, but not if you try to rush things. Mars can be impatient. Pluto can be very much to do with deeper desires that we're not quite conscious of. And therefore, whether it is to help a loved one with their financial situation, spoil someone you like, or go for that big ticket item, I would delay if you can. As the week goes on, however, that combination between Venus and Mercury could see some very positive financial news come through for you on Thursday. But the week does end with a full moon, when the moon and the sun, the queen and the king of the sky, are competing for our attention. The moon in the sign of Leo can be very proudful. It can be very much about maintaining our reputation. But for you, it's in the part of your chart to do with your deepest connections to others. And if your desire to do what you need to do in the here and now, your immediate financial situation or your personal values is not quite chiming with someone that you're trying to collaborate with, that could come up quite strongly over the following 2 weeks. But do watch out for my Leo full moon deep dive video for more information on that. If you've yet to order your personal 12-month forecast, totally unique to you based on your birth data, and just to say, if you don't know your time, you can choose my solar option, which I've specifically developed for people who don't know their time. But also you'll get your life roadmap report, which helps us to understand the patterns that are played out in our lives. And you'll get your free gift of your general love Chinese and Indian written zodiac forecast. But through to the end of January, I'm giving 50% off. Just apply Astro26 at the checkout to achieve that discount. Thank you. So Aquarius, your week commencing the 26th of January. On the screen, your event chart. Your two rulers of Saturn and Uranus continue to collaborate superbly. If you recall, they reached an absolute perfect sextile last week, the first for 29 years, so that was really significant. But if you have found there have been some headwinds around finances over the last couple of years, I feel that where we are now, planetary-wise, for you, is giving you an opportunity to reset the dial, to be enormously dynamic. But there may be another part of your nature, that more Saturnian energy, which can be a little more cautious and does like routines and what you know. That's flagged by the moon being in the sign of Taurus, along with your modern ruler Uranus. But that's clashing with Mars, Pluto and the sun on Monday. You might feel a bit torn between one particular avenue which creates excitement and change and sticking with what you know, or it could be someone close to you is a bit doubtful about your desire to be much more dynamic and much more invested in the here and now and much more assertive in your approach. So there may be someone close to you, a family member, who just feels that this welter of energy that's building up in Aquarius is so much. The shift is quite remarkable from where you were recently, where you may have been feeling much quieter. However, as this week goes on, you do have a beautiful link between Mercury and Venus on Thursday. If there is an idea that you want to showcase, you can do so with a lot of charm, but also a lot of sparkle and persuasion. And people will be becoming conscious of the determination and stamina that you've got to drive forwards with what's important to you. The full moon that occurs on Sunday suggests that somebody, a bit like at the start of the week, may not quite get where you are, and that could be a little bit frustrating. But sometimes in life you have to be really single-minded to seize the golden prize, and I feel that's the story of this week. Maybe you've got to overcome some of your own inner doubts early in the week. Maybe there is a case for not rushing something if you need to explain it a little better to someone closer to you. But by the end of the week, if someone still isn't really responding to the enthusiasm, drive and passion that you're demonstrating that's incredible at this time, you will have a choice. Do you go with the program you want to create, or do you defer that to please someone else? If you've yet to order your personal 12-month forecast, totally unique to you based on your birth data, and just to say, if you don't know your time, you can choose my solar option, which I've specifically developed for people who don't know their time. But also, you'll get your life roadmap report, which helps us to understand the patterns that are played out in our lives. And you'll get your free gift of your General Love Chinese and Indian written zodiac forecast. But through to the end of January, I'm giving 50% off. Just apply Astro26 at the checkout to achieve that discount. Thank you. So Pisces, your week commencing the 26th of January. On the screen now, your event chart. Your modern aquatic ruler is going to be leaving your sign and is not going to return in our lifetime later on Monday. But if you recall, for 6 months last year, from the end of March, Neptune did have a brief sojourn into Aries before. So you have that experience, but think of all the creativity, the imagination, the flair, perhaps the healing that you've demonstrated and developed over the last year since 2012, when Neptune arrived in your sign full time. And what Neptune and latterly Saturn from the middle of February will ask you to do is convert those ideas into something more tangible. But there is a challenge with that, because Neptune's not so good with earthy second house energy. And of course the fieriness of Aries is not really a great mix for a water planet either. So it will require discipline and attention to detail. And what you could find yourself doing this week is a lot of thinking about how this is going to play out. But you may want to just be a little bit more withdrawn from others. But someone could in some ways try to steal your peace of mind, because the position of the moon on Monday in the bubbly, on the face of it, third house, great for quick beat communication, but it squares with the rugged energy of Mars, the psychological leveraging energies of Pluto, along with the Sun early on the day. You may read something online, something a friend says, could be a social media post. It may be you hear something that's been shared, that's a little bit of a gossip, and it could really get under your skin. So just be aware that if you are feeling a bit raw, it could be amplified in a big way as you go into this week, and it won't be because Neptune has moved into Aries. However, as the week goes on, although you could feel a bit defensive and prickly with Mars and Pluto in a conjunction on Tuesday, that's exact, By Thursday, a reassuring piece of information can head your way. A caring and kindly friend who is inclusive, who understands you that much more, who isn't so much of a fair weather friend, can be just what you need. But by the end of the week, the full moon in Leo just reminds you that despite this more psychological energy that's playing out in Aquarius at the moment, remember Aquarius can be about knowledge, but it's about a higher purpose. And if you're not really feeling a soul purpose in what you're doing, the full moon in the practical sixth house, particularly around everyday routines and work, just asks you to think about in the next 2 weeks, is there a change that you need to adopt? You can really put that into motion if the answer is yes, when the sun returns to your sign and you have Pisces season starting at pace. But you are in a period of preparation or perhaps seclusion at the present time. But if there's someone you know is a bit of a gossip or drains your energy very easily, even if you don't necessarily particularly dislike them, I would really steer clear at the very start of this week. If you've yet to order your personal 12-month forecast, totally unique to you based on your birth data, and just to say, if you don't know your time, you can choose my solar option, which I've specifically developed for people who don't know their time. But also, you'll get your life roadmap report, which helps us to understand the patterns that are played out in our lives. And you'll get your free gift of your General Love Chinese and Indian written zodiac forecast. But through to the end of January, I'm giving 50% off. Just apply Astro26 at the checkout to achieve that discount. Thank you.